Hello, my name is Agustín Ferreyra and I'm in charge of the mini-seminar of the Scarlett Letter, which is a historical novel of colonial America written by Nathaniel Hawthorne in 1850, and it is full of psychological insight. My thesis is that the Scarlett Letter depicts how social pressure influences on people's construction and assumption of their own identities. This can be seen especially in the characters of Hester Prynne and Minister Arthur Dimmesdale. To begin with, I'm going to present some psychological background so that you can follow the presentation in a clearer way, because according to some psychological research, people's personalities and even their identities are social constructions based on expectations and roles imposed onto them by others. The philosopher and sociologist Castoriadis believed that individuals are a social creation made up by the limits and the norms of behavior of the society to which they belong in a specific historic moment. That collectivity assigns a representation of itself and others, and in that way identities emerge. Freud expressed in Civilization and Discontent that culture imposes every time more and more the norms by leaving behind sexual satisfaction and aggressive behavior, turning them into feelings of guilt. The more developed the culture and its laws are, the more discontent they generate. Also, Freud said that a person who's part of a mass stops being independent and gets subordinate to the group he or she belongs. Now, regarding the historical background, the novel is presented in the colonial America of the 17th century. At that time, Puritanism prevailed in Boston, Massachusetts, and according to their beliefs, ministers were admired for being considered educated people strongly connected to God, and adultery, on the other hand, was considered a serious sin and even a crime. Therefore, even though Hester, who was just a common inhabitant of the town, and the minister Dimmesdale share the same behavior, the identities they are assigned during the novel are completely different due to social expectations and criticism of the time, since social identity can be used as a form of inclusion but also as a form of exclusion. In the case of Hester, for example, she is stigmatized, publicly shamed and forced by the people of Boston to wear a badge of humiliation, a prominent scarlet letter A, as a sign of adultery, which from that moment onwards defines her own identity. All her human essence is suppressed, and the only feature she is going to be defined by is her condemned sin. Therefore, the Scarlet Letter becomes her new identity, and one of which she cannot escape. Here there is a quote that can illustrate how Helen's sin turns into the almost only and most noticeable feature of her identity. She saw that owing the peculiar effect of this convex mirror, the Scarlet Letter was represented in exaggerated and gigantic proportions, so as to be greatly the most prominent feature of her appearance. When Hester and Pearl visit Governor Bellingham's mansion, Hester is studying a suit of armor and notices that the way the gleaming breastplate reflects her body massively enlarges the Scarlet Letter. This striking image encourages us to think about how the meaning of the Scarlet Letter overwhelms Hester's identity. Instead of being seen as an individual, Hester has become nothing more than a walking symbol of her crime. The first and often the only thing that other characters notice is the evidence of her guilt. The identity assumed by society ends up being also assumed by herself, as we can see in this quote. Let her cover the mark as she will. The pang of it will be always in her heart. That shows that while the public visible mark of the Scarlet Letter will lead to shame, it is Hester's inner personal knowledge of her sin that makes her feel guilty. In a sense, the Scarlet Letter is almost unnecessary because it is Hester's emotional and psychological guilt that will cause her suffer, and that always will be with her. However, later, the letter becomes a mark of identity. When Hester takes off the letter and throws it away in the forest, her daughter Pearl starts screaming since she could not recognize her mother. In that way, it is shown that Hester cannot simply escape from her past. Her identity is entangled with being the woman who bears a Scarlet Letter, and it may not be possible for her to adopt a new identity. Besides, the tombstone emblazoned with the letter A shows that even after her death, her identity will always be bound up with the fateful choice she made. In the case of the minister Dimmesdale, the social pressure in the definition of his identity is completely different. He shares the same sin of adultery with Hester, but it is kept in secret. So, while he is believed to be an eloquent and pure of heart and mind young man, he only knows who he really is, and Hester, of course. Something which is really shocking for me is the fact that people don't want to believe that he is not that idealized person that they want him to be. His illness is psychosomatic, caused by his own shame and self-loathing, and by keeping secrets from his community. Nevertheless, when he claims to be a sinner to free himself from his guilt, the people from the town just adore him even more and think he is a very humble person for admitting that. And later, when he eventually confesses his affair with Hester in the podium and reveals the letter A in his chest, people don't relate it with the same connotation as Helen Hest's letter, but they reinterpret the A as standing for angel. Now let's analyze a quote about him. It is inconceivable the agony with which this public veneration tortured him. This line explains why Dimmesdale experiences such agonizing guilt. Not only does no one know the role he played in Hester's scandal, they think that he is extremely pure and moral. So the strong contrast between how Dimmesdale sees himself and how the rest of the world sees him is what leads him always being tortured by guilt. If he was perceived as an ordinary, average man with a mixture of good and bad qualities, for example, Dimmesdale might have been better able to cope with his secret. Hence, here we can see how, to a great extent, the positive identity assigned by society can also put pressure and make someone feel slave of social expectations and not being able to show his own true colors even though he wants to. Finally, though the end is not actually happy, it reveals that the fact that Helen assumed the identity given by society in a certain way empowers her and gives her a sense of self-reliance, while the fact that Dimmesdale is not allowed to assume the role he thinks he deserves gradually destroys him. After Hester is publicly forced to wear the Scarlet Letter, she is not physically imprisoned, and leaving Massachusetts Bay colony would allow her to remove the Scarlet Letter and resume to a normal life. Surprisingly, Hester reacts with dismay when Chillingworth tells her that the town fathers are considering letting her remove the letter. Hester's behavior is premised on her desire to determine her own identity rather to allow others to determine it for her. To her, running away or removing the letter would be an acknowledgement of society's power over her. She would be admitting that the letter is a mark of shame and something from which she desires to escape. Instead, Hester's stay, refiguring the Scarlet Letter as a symbol of her own experience and character. Her past sin is a part of who she is. So, to pretend that it never happened would mean denying a part of herself. Therefore, the letter's meaning shifts as time passes. Originally intended to mark Hester as an adulterer, the A eventually comes to stand for able. Finally, it becomes indeterminate. The Native Americans who came to watch the election day think it marks her as a person of importance and status. Unfortunately, Dimmesdale never fully recognizes the truth of what Hester has learned, that individuality and strength are gained by quiet self-assertion and by a reconfiguration, not a rejection of one's assigned identity. Thank you very much.